This lecture is on 19th century feminist philosopher John Stuart Mill and his work, The Subjection of Women. Mill says the legal subordination of one sex to another is wrong in itself, that it's a hindrance to human improvement, and it ought to be replaced by a principle of perfect equality, where each spouse both leads and is led. He says this is the ideal of marriage, and that all other conceptions are primitive barbarism. Marriage based on equality is necessary for the moral regeneration of mankind. Mill says organizing a society where both sexes are equal has not yet been tried. Adopting a society where men are dominating over women was not the result of deliberating what is best for humanity. At the beginning of human society, women were put in bondage to men due to inferiority in muscle strength. Laws were then formed based on these pre-existing relations. Facts of physical strength of men over women were turned into legal rights. Mill says, just because men dominating women has always been the case, does not mean it is what is best for human happiness and well-being. We don't know that the improvement and prosperity we have reached through a patriarchal system could have just as easily been reached through a different system. Rule over women is what is currently accepted, but a great number of women do not accept it. They do so through writings, protests, and petitioning for parliamentary suffrage, equal education, and equal career opportunity. We don't know how many women silently share these similar aspirations, but so many would cherish these freedoms if they weren't taught to suppress these desires. While most women do not complain of the power of husbands in general, each complains of their own husband or the husband of her friends. It is the same in other cases of servitude. The serfs didn't complain of the power of their lords, but only their oppressive exercise of it. No enslaved class ever asked for complete liberty at once. To rebel against the established rules of male dominance is still looked at the way it used to be seen for a subject to rebel against his king. There would be many more complaints of women against their husbands, but speaking out could lead to harsher treatment. Wives are unable to protect themselves from the harsh treatment of their husbands. In no other case, except for a child, is the person who has been proved to have suffered an injury placed back under the power of the person who inflicted it. Mill gives reasons for the inability to overthrow the patriarchy. He cites women are naturally romantically attracted to their oppressors, that every privilege and pleasure a wife has is dependent on the will of her husband. Every opportunity a woman has can only be attained through her husband, and that women are in a different position than those of other dominated classes, and that men do not just want their obedience, but also their affection. Men don't want a forced slave, but a willing one. Men enslave women's minds. The patriarchal culture educates girls that a woman's good character is submission. Mill says the nature of man and woman is unknowable. We've never seen how women would behave if they lived without any contact with men, or how women would behave if they weren't under the control of men. We cannot know how women are or aren't essentially alike or different from a moral and psychological perspective. Women have been kept so oppressed by men that it's no telling how women's nature would act if they were free of men. Mill finds ridiculous the faulty generalizations made about women's nature from the limited experiences of a sample of women. He acknowledges there are differences in bodily constitution between men and women, but Mill is skeptical that any other inherent moral or psychological differences between men and women are knowable. A man gets to know the thoughts and feelings of his own wife, but this is a solitary case. With the husband's authority and the wife's subordination, perfect transparency is prevented due to the wife's perceived duty to communicate only what is pleasing to him. To understand one woman is not to understand any other woman. Even to study all women of one country or social status is not to study all women of other countries and social statuses. Even to study all women on the planet would be to study only women of one period of history. Thus, knowledge acquired of women is very imperfect. Mill says it is pointless to ban women from things that they can't do by nature anyway. If women can perform a certain skill, but not as well as men, then competition itself will exclude them. It is ironic that the only things that the law have prohibited women from doing are the things that they have proven themselves capable of doing. For example, with leadership. St. Joan of Arc and Queen Elizabeth have demonstrated that women can be great leaders. Mill commentates on the work of women in philosophy, art, and science. He says no woman has produced a first-rank work in philosophy, science, or art, but this doesn't mean that women, by nature, are incapable of doing so. It's only been 3 generations since women have begun trying their capacity in philosophy, science, or art. Deficiencies in women's art in comparison to men have been the result of lack of originality that is distinct from men. Nearly everything has already been thought of. If women lived isolated from men, they would have a literature of their own. More time is needed for women to emancipate themselves from male models and guide itself by its own impulses. Women who are educated in the fine arts come from the higher classes, but they don't make their professional living doing art. They are amateurs. Professional artists bring about superior quality art than amateurs. Women are taught music to play, but not to compose original work. Thus, it is only in composing original work that men are superior to women. Mill says that very few women have time for art. The household requires excessive vigilance. She is in charge of the entire family. Society imposes she make herself charming, that she go to dinner parties, attend concerts, go to evening parties, make morning visits, engage in letter writing, that she dress well. The male professional has much more time to dedicate himself to his art. There is a motive to be famous in intellectual occupations and artwork, but women seldom have this motive. She is educated to submit to those around her and be less ambitious. Many women have made themselves capable of doing everything, perhaps without exception, that is done by men. Mill says it is unjust to women to not allow them to choose their occupation. It damages society as a whole that women are not allowed to compete with men for jobs. Jobs are often filled by men who are less fit for the role than many women. Society can't afford to reject the competent service of half of humanity. We need to give women access to education and give them opportunities to work alongside men. Women should be brought up equally capable of understanding business, public affairs, and higher matters of speculation. Mill takes on an objection that women are higher in anxiety, which would impede their job performance. Mill acknowledges that it is plausible that a nervous temperament is inherited by a greater number of women than men. Yet, there are men who have high anxiety and excel in jobs. Why then should women of the same temperament be unfit for them? While high anxiety can be an obstacle in certain jobs, it can be an aid in others. Those of nervous temperament can sustain excitement and be more spirited. These people could be great leaders who can persevere through pain. Just because someone is highly emotional does not mean that this person doesn't have good self-control. Mill points out women have all had a large impact on human belief and character, like through the education a mother gives to her children, or through men striving for a woman's affection. Women in labor will allow them to have an even fuller impact. Mill believes the division of labor between a husband and wife, where the man brings in the income while the wife oversees the spending of the money, is generally the most suitable arrangement. Mill says in a just state of affairs, it is not desirable that the wife should contribute by her labor to the income of the family. Her labor contributing to the family may be good for her. However, it enables him to abuse his power by both forcing her to work and care for the family while he remains idle. The quality of the work she does taking care of the children and household will likely suffer if she overexerts herself by both bringing in an income through her labor and caring for the household. Mill points out that women have had a softening influence that resists men from being overly aggressive. Women have been a stimulus for courage for men who want to be desired by women. These types of moral influences by women have led to the development of chivalry. Chivalry is defined as combining the virtues of war with those of gentleness and generosity towards non-military and defenseless classes, with a special veneration towards women and a desire to earn women's favor. Mill sees chivalry as one of the most precious achievements of the moral history of the human race. Since their sphere of action has widened beyond the household, women in modern European life have influenced the culture's aversion to war and its promotion of philanthropy. Mill says, however, women's lack of education have led their philanthropy efforts to doing much harm. If they had an education of understanding, rather than going off mere sentiment, they would see that preventing people who have self-destructed from the painful consequences of their own actions just enables them and prevents them from prospering and being self-dependent. Mill asks, how can a woman understand the value of making sure the needy become self-dependent if she has been dependent on a man her whole life? When it comes to moral differences between men and women, it is commonly believed that women are generally more moral. In no other established order do the better obey the worse. If this speculation of women being more moral amounts to anything, it is only an acknowledgement of the corrupting influence of power. While servitude is corrupting to both slaves and masters, it corrupts the masters more. Mill believes that if women are better than men at anything, it is self-sacrifice for those of their own family. Women are universally taught that they are born and created for self-sacrifice. Equality of rights between men and women would get rid of the overemphasis on self-sacrifice, and men would be more unselfish by no longer worshiping their own will. Mill points out marriage is the destination for women by society, often done under coercion. Originally, women were taken by force or sold by their father to the husband. With the rise of Christianity, the church required a formal yes by the woman, but there was often great pressure to not refuse who her father wanted her to marry, with the only exception to marrying being to make monastic vows as a nun. Mill says, now that blacks are free, marriage is the only bondage known to our law. In the old laws of England, the husband was called the lord of his wife. She vows a lifelong obedience to him at the altar and held to it throughout her life. She can acquire no property but for him. Hardly any slave is subject at all hours and minutes. Slaves usually have a task and then are able to have their own time and personal pleasures that their master rarely intrudes upon. A wife is a slave in an even more full sense of the word, because she is always in such close proximity to her master. The husband and wife's children are the husband's children by law. Even after he is dead, the children do not belong to their mother unless it is included in the husband's will. If she leaves him, she cannot take the children or anything else with her. If he chooses, he can get her to return to him by law. Only legal separation by decree of court justice can entitle her to live apart from her husband without being forced back and to have her own income. But this is only given in cases of desertion or extreme cruelty. Mill argues that the wife doesn't have much to fight back with. He grants that a wife too can retaliate and make a man's life miserable, such as through the power of the scold. However, a wife's non-physical harm toward her husband can only defend herself from the least tyrannical husbands. The wife's power of being disagreeable generally only works on husbands less likely to be tyrants. How can it be decided when there is a difference of opinion in marriage? It can be argued that in a family, as in a government, there must be some ultimate ruler who has final say in disagreements. Mill says it is not true that in all voluntary associations between two people, one of them must be master. In partnerships in business, one person does not necessarily have absolute power. Mill says it's true that when a decision needs to be made and there isn't time for compromise, one person must have control over who makes that decision. But it doesn't mean it always has to be the same person who makes that decision. There could be a division of powers, each being absolute in their own area. The arrangement of the division of powers should be done by the married couple, not the government, since it is based on each spouse's capabilities. Any change in areas of control within the division of powers involves the consent of both spouses. Mill acknowledges that there are those spouses, both men and women, who will not compromise and will not settle for any wish but their own. He says such persons should get divorced. Mill says marriage equality is what is fair to both spouses and instrumental to their happiness. But marriage equality also offers a moral education for humanity. Previously, humanity has known a morality of force that is based on command and obey. But the only good moral education involves promoting a society between equals, because the foundation of justice is equality. The family is currently a school of despotism. All the selfish propensities that exist in humanity have their source in the present relationship between men and women. To be a boy is to grow up with the belief that by merely being a male, he is by right superior to half the human race. The family, justly constituted in equality, would be the real school of the values of freedom. The family will always involve command for the parents and obedience from the children, but it will also involve equality between the spouses and living together in love. Any freedom a man has where he is absolute master of the woman he is most intimately to is not a genuine freedom. Mill mentions that women require their suffrage to guarantee just and equal consideration. Even if every woman were a wife, and every wife is a slave, all the more do these slaves need legal protection. We know what legal protection slaves get when laws are written by their masters.